Saint Julia, also known as Saint Julia of Corsica, was a virgin martyr who is venerated as a saint. She, along with Saint Devota, are the patron saints of Corsica. Both of them were martyred in pre-Christian Corsica under Roman rule. Although Julia is included in most summary lives of the saints, the details somewhat vary. A few basic accounts emerge that tell us the story. Bishop Victor Vitensis of Africa wrote most of the story from her time while investigating her cause. Julia was born of noble aristocratic parents in Carthage, South Africa. She grew up with a deep faith, and her parents loved her very much. The ancient city of Carthage, founded by the Phoenicians, competed with Rome for domination in the western part of the Mediterranean. Given the high-profile nature of the city, it was also subject to numerous barbarian attacks, and the city's defenses had crumbled. During one such attack by the Vandals, Julia was taken from her family. The Vandals later sold her into slavery. She was purchased by a pagan merchant of Syria named Eusebius. Despite her dire circumstances, she did not complain or feel sorry for herself. Rather, Julia accepted everything as a gift from the Lord and performed the most humble tasks with wonderful cheerfulness. In her spare time, she read holy books and prayed fervently. So ardent was her love of God. In fact, her very joyful nature stood out to Eusebius. As such, she quickly became Eusebius's favorite slave. Her virtuous lifestyle and joyful attitude made her the best worker. It was easy to be her master. One day, Eusebius was headed on a journey to Gaul. He decided to bring Julia with him. Upon reaching the northern part of an island, he anchored his ship. From a distance, he saw that sacrifices were about to be conducted by the pagans, and he immediately left with all his people to attend the ceremony. On that day, they were slaying a bull to the devils. Julia stayed back in the ship because she would not be defiled by the superstitious ceremonies, which she openly rejected. The governor of the island, Felix, was a narrow-minded pagan who needed to have things his way. Eusebius was welcomed by Felix, and he joined them in their celebration. One of Felix's men saw Julia alone in the ship, praying to God. He quickly informed this to his master, who didn't take this kindly. Felix called Eusebius and asked who this woman was who dared to insult their gods. "She is a Christian," Eusebius said. He explained that he had tried to convince her to give up her faith many times. Yet, even being her master, she did not move from her faith. Eventually, he stopped trying. It didn't matter to him because she was a wonderful worker. That excuse was not going to work for the stubborn governor. Eusebius explained he could not bear parting with Julia because she was so diligent and faithful in her work for him. Felix wanted to buy Julia at any cost. He even offered 4 of his slaves in return for her alone. Eusebius refused, saying, "No, for I would lose the most valuable thing I have in the world rather than be deprived of her." Felix was even more angry when he heard this. Then he thought of a plan to get hold of Julia. Felix prepared a banquet and made good Eusebius and his men drink a lot of wine. When they were intoxicated and asleep, he asked his men to get Julia. The men took her to the shore, where she stood before Felix, alone and unprotected. All the governor wanted was to break Julia's faith. He tried to get her to sacrifice to his gods. He told her he would grant her freedom if she would obey. But Julia refused to deny Christ. "My freedom is to serve Christ," she said, "whom I love every day in all the purity of my soul." The governor became violently angry. He slapped her in the face and ripped off her hair in his anger. Then she was beaten with a whip by his men. Julia remained calm and said that if Christ was flogged and crowned with thorns for her, why should she not endure this punishment for him? Finally, he ordered her to be hanged on a cross until she died. As Julia lay on the cross, she prayed for one last time, and then she died. She died as a result of her faith. Some accounts say that a dove flew from her mouth as she died. Saint Julia underwent a lot of struggles in her short life. She was a slave. She was mocked for her faith. She was even tortured and killed for it. Yet, through it all, her faith remained strong. Saint Julia was declared a patroness of Corsica by the Church in 1809. Saint Julia is often depicted with the palm of martyrdom and the crucifix. She is the patron saint of Corsica, Livorno, torture victims, and pathologies of the hand and the feet. Her feast day is celebrated on May 23rd. Sorry for interrupting the video. I am here to deliver a quick message. If you think our channel has given you $5 worth of knowledge, then can you take a moment to make a donation? Please don't skip the video. 99.8% of our viewers simply skip this, or many think they will donate later and forget. If you make a small donation now, then we can keep making good videos like this one. You can choose to support us through Patreon or make a one-time donation through PayPal. The links are given in the description box below. If you are one of our rare donors, we warmly thank you. You have shown the world access to good content matters to you. Thanks again, and God bless. Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton is one of the keystones of the American Catholic Church. She founded the first American religious community for women, the Sisters of Charity. She opened the first American parish school and established the first American Catholic orphanage. All this she did in the span of 46 years while raising her 5 children. Elizabeth was born in 1774. Just 2 years before the United States itself was born. She was the daughter of a wealthy Episcopalian family in New York City. Her mother taught little Elizabeth when she was just a child about the prayers and laid the foundation of her faith. At the age of 3, Elizabeth's mother died and she was left with her father, Dr. Richard Bailey. When Dr. Bailey remarried, Elizabeth's stepmother continued lessons about the Episcopalian faith and God. Also educated by her father, Elizabeth learned from his great virtue to serve the poor of the community. From a young age, Elizabeth could be found bringing food to those less fortunate than herself. Beautiful, vivacious, fluent in French, a fine musician, and an accomplished horsewoman, she grew up and became a popular guest at parties and balls. Small wonder young William Seton, a handsome and wealthy businessman, fell head over heels in love with her. They were soon married and became parents of 5 children. Besides looking after her husband and family, Elizabeth established an organization in New York City called the Widows' Society. She and other members daily visited the poor in their homes to nurse and comfort them. Little did Elizabeth know that she would soon become a widow and with her children face sad and difficult times. The Seton family's shipping business went bankrupt when many ships were lost at sea during wars. To make matters worse, William Seton became seriously ill with tuberculosis, which was a dreaded killer in those days. The couple and their oldest daughter, Anna, moved to sunny Italy, where William hoped to regain his health. In spite of their best efforts, William died 2 days after Christmas in Pisa at the age of 37. She wept, then reproached herself for behaving as though God were not present. After William's death, Elizabeth and her daughter remained with William's longtime friends, the Felici family, until the spring of 1804. While waiting to return to America, Elizabeth attended the churches of her Italian friends, where she experienced the Catholic faith. They took Elizabeth to Florence, where the churches overwhelmed her, and the devotion of the common people impressed her. She began attending Mass with her friends and witnessed people's belief in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. Eventually, Elizabeth returned to New York City, determined to become a Catholic. In 1805, having completed instructions in her new faith, Elizabeth was received into the church. She was happy to be a Catholic, but her family of devout Episcopalians was dead set against Elizabeth's decision. At that time, unlike today, people were often very intolerant of other religions. Elizabeth's close relatives chose to forget that they had ever known her and would not lend her money or help pay her bills. She was now a destitute widow with no means to care for her children. It was almost impossible to make ends meet. Elizabeth had to work night and day to make a simple living for her children. She started a school, but that soon closed when students would not come to class simply because their teacher was a Catholic. These months of trial deepened Elizabeth's faith, but also deepened her financial difficulties. A priest in Baltimore, Maryland, learned of Elizabeth's plight and invited her to begin a girls' school in that city. At the time, public schools charged tuition and were only available to the elite of the society. Through the vision of Archbishop Carroll, Elizabeth established a Catholic school which was open to all, free of cost, and focused on the poor and impoverished. Women came to help Elizabeth, and the school grew. Soon, it seemed obvious that God was asking Elizabeth to dedicate her life completely to Him. This was the beginning of the Order of Sisters that Elizabeth founded. Father de Bourgh gave her the title of Mother. Indeed, the title was especially appropriate for Elizabeth. Some of her own children were still at the stone house with her, and she was now the superior of the women who joined the order. As in earlier years with the Widow Society, Elizabeth continued to visit the sick and the poor of the neighborhood. The sisters brought them medicine, food, and clothes, cleaned their homes, cared for the children, and offered kind words of encouragement. Life for the religious community was difficult. The sisters had little income, and their housing was sparse. The cold winters took their toll, but the work prospered with Elizabeth at the helm. By the next year, they were placed in charge of an orphanage in Philadelphia. The Sisters of Charity began establishing orphanages and hospitals across the United States and continued teaching the poor through parochial education. Tuberculosis ravaged the community. Anna, Elizabeth's oldest daughter, contracted the disease and died. Rebecca, the youngest daughter, too died in her mother's arms in 1816 when she was only 14 years old. Elizabeth, too, was losing her own battle with tuberculosis. The trials of separation from her children, conflict, and death had worn on her. The night of her death, January 4th, 1821, she began the prayers for the dying herself, and one of the sisters, knowing that she loved French, prayed the Gloria and the Magnificent in French with her. Early in the morning, on January 4th, 1821, Saint Elizabeth died peacefully. In 1959, Pope John XXIII declared Mother Seton a venerable, and in 1963, a blessed. Then, on September 14, 1975, Pope Paul VI named Elizabeth Seton Saint of the Church. She had no extraordinary gifts. She was not a mystic or stigmatic. She did not prophesy or speak in tongues. She had two great devotions: abandonment to the will of God and an ardent love for the Blessed Sacrament.